Rules Committee will come to order. We're here for consideration of H.R. 5052, the Sequester Replacement Reconciliation Act. We're happy to welcome the Chair of the Committee on the Budget, Mr. Ryan. Thank you very much for being with us. And without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety. We welcome your summary.
Thank you. My summary will only take about 45 minutes. So,
well, I mean, you know, let me just tell you that those are not funny remarks. I'm just telling you. I mean, I don't know if you followed what's been going on the floor. I left here at 1 o'clock this morning, so when somebody says they're going to talk for 45 minutes, it's not funny to me at all. That's why you got the response that you did.
It usually is preceded by saying, I move to strike the last word.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah.
I can just answer questions if you like.
That sounds terrific.
How's that sound?
Well, let me just say that obviously we know why it is that we're here dealing with this issue that was part of last August's agreement, and we know the ramifications of the sequester could be far-reaching, and having the committees address this is an important thing, and we appreciate the direction that your committee has provided, and we believe that as we move ahead with this important work, pursuing what I believe is really a bipartisan shared goal of trying to get our fiscal house in order, that we are doing the right thing. So I thank you for that. And I have no questions. Mr. Sessions.
I have no questions.
Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, I just have a couple. You know, as you probably are aware, Mr. Ryan, the Rules Committee has had a tradition of allowing amendments to reconciliation bills in the vast majority of cases.
Has not, you mean?
Has. Since 1989, 11 of the last 15 reconciliation rules have allowed for at least one amendment. That's nearly 75%. This committee has even waived the germaneness rule to allow the minority a fair up or down vote on their proposal. The Rangel substitute was given a germaneness waiver in the 106th Congress. And so I guess my question to you is, do you think it's appropriate for the House to have at least one vote on the Van Hollen proposal?
If I recall, the health care bill did not have amendments, and the Deficit Reduction Act did not have amendments.
I'm just, but the 75%
So with respect to precedents, if I recall, they didn't. If someone has commensurate savings, we have not seen that. No one's given us a scored amendment that says, here is how you replace these savings with spending cuts somewhere else. So I haven't even seen anything close to an amendment in the nature of substitute offer.
Happy to yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me just say that we very much had hoped to make Mr. Van Hollen's substitute in order, which was submitted. But obviously, compliance with cut-go is something that is important, and that's what's prevented us and leading us to the position that we're in. And the gentleman's absolutely right in pointing to the fact that the health care reconciliation was considered under a closed rule, not providing an opportunity. And so this is not by any means unprecedented. This is something that is
nearly 75%. You know, of the reconciliation bills since 1989 have allowed for at least one amendment. So the vast majority, you know, that have allowed for an amendment. So I think that's more of a tradition than not. And all I always want to know is,
I would just defer to the Committee of Jurisdiction. You're the Rules Committee. I would defer to the Rules Committee to yield to their wisdom on the matter.
Well, should we let Mr. Van Hollen testify?
Well, I mean, we went through exhaustive testimony from the chairman of the committee. And we've gone into the questioning portion after Mr. Ryan's long opening statement. And so, but I guess out of respect to you, Mr. Van Hollen, in recognizing the amount of time that Mr. Ryan took, that we'll give you a portion of time that you see fit, recognizing that he's exhausted all the time that I would have allotted to the Budget Committee. So.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. And if you were to agree to make the substitute amendment in order, I would stop right now, because we would have plenty to...
I would agree to make the amendment in order if it were cut-go compliant.
But, Mr. Chairman, I mean, as you know, the rules are rigged in a way that you can't... They're ruled in a way, they're rigged in a way that you cannot close tax loopholes and ask people with over $1 million to help pay for deficit reduction as part of a substitute amendment that contains both cuts, but also cuts to tax loopholes. And the way the House Republicans have written the rules, you can't have a balanced approach. You can't take the approach that's been recommended by every bipartisan commission that has looked at the question of deficit reduction. And that's pretty amazing statement, because it means by rule you're prohibiting people from taking what has been a bipartisan approach. And it's a shame. And as a result of that, I just arrived. I hadn't realized you'd already made a decision that you would make an order. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the Rules Committee could easily make it an order if you leave it to the body to decide whether or not this was a preferable way to eliminate the 1 year of the sequester. I would say our proposal also gets rid of the sequester that's going to hit Medicare. Under the Budget Control Act, the Medicare program will be cut by 2%. Our substitute amendment will prohibit and prevent that 2% cut to the Medicare program. The Republican proposal allows that cut to go forward. So in addition to prohibiting us from taking a balanced approach to deficit reduction that accomplishes the same deficit savings as the sequester, but in a different and better way, we think, you're also preventing the body from having an opportunity to prohibit and prevent the sequester on the Medicare funds.
Well, thank you for that. Let me just say that we will be letting the body decide. As you know, no special rule is considered on the House floor and moves ahead without a majority vote. And so the body will be deciding on the structure that we do provide for consideration of this in compliance with the rules of the House. Ms. Fox. I'll come back to you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Ms. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions, but I appreciate the two gentlemen being here tonight.
Mr. Governor.
Just a couple of things. One is the majority in the 106 Congress did waive the germaneness rules, so Mr. Rangel could allow his substitute. So that's not unprecedented. I assume you're going to waive all rules for your bill before it goes to the floor. And I think what I heard the chairman of the rules saying is he wants the House to work its will. And I guess what I,
Gentlemen, I'll tell you what I said. I'll tell you what I said.
But allowing
Gentlemen, yield so I can tell you what I said.
Well, if I can finish my sentence.
Well, you told me you said what I said. You said what I said, and it was inaccurate.
I yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. What I said is the House will determine how we proceed on this issue by voting for or against the special rule that is reported out of this committee. I thank my friend for yielding.
I guess what is so outrageous about this process is that the House will not be given an opportunity to work its will. That we will not have an up or down vote on Mr. Van Hollen's proposal. I mean, if you don't like it because you don't want to raise revenues, fine, vote against it, speak against it,
If I could maybe just elaborate on your point.
I'm happy to yield.
We made a decision when we enacted the rules package for the House of Representatives in the 112th Congress on what we think balance means. We have a difference of opinion on what balanced means. We have a spending-driven debt crisis in front of us. And we think if you're going to spend more money, you should cut spending somewhere else in the federal government to pay for that. And we don't like the idea of continually going back to hardworking taxpayers over and over and over again
Then vote against
to raise more taxes,
vote against his
to spend more money.
Then vote against his proposal.
That's what got us to where we are together.
No, vote against his proposal.
We voted against his proposal in committee.
Well, allow us all to have that opportunity.
We voted.
What
We
is so
voted when we passed the Cutco rule.
Letting the members of the House work.
When we passed the Cutco rule, we made a decision. You didn't like the decision. We made a decision that if we're going to spend more money, we need to pay for that spending by cutting spending somewhere else in the government. It's something we think is right. I know you don't, but that's the decision we made when we passed the rules package.
And when you look at the substitute that Mr. Van Hollen has offered, and you look at what the Republicans have put forward, I think it presents a real choice for people. I mean, it's kind of a stark contrast, and it demonstrates where our priorities are. All I'm simply saying is to give the Democrats the courtesy of having the ability to bring what they want.
They did when they brought their budget to the floor.
On the floor of the House.
To his credit, he brought a budget to the floor. The Progressive Caucus brought a budget. The Black Caucus brought a budget. Lots of caucuses.
Would like a vote to Mr. Van Hollen?
Well, thank you, Mr. McGovern. I heard our Republican colleagues saying today that they were the only ones that had come forward with a concrete proposal to prevent the sequester from going into effect next year. That's just flatly not true. And in fact, in the Budget Committee, we proposed a number of ideas. We were defeated in a vote there. We also had a proposal that said, let's create a structure to deal with the sequester over the full 10-year period and take a balanced approach. And when we say balance, we mean the kind of balance that other bipartisan groups have adopted. But we never voted on the substitute amendment that I've submitted to the Rules Committee.
It's different than your
in the
amendment.
budget. It's not just different. It is a full substitute. If you adopt it, it will replace the sequester for 1 year. So I would ask you, Mr. Chairman, to look at it because you have made the point, as have your colleagues, that only you Republicans have this, a proposal, a concrete, specific proposal. We've got one now, Chairman, members of the Rules Committee. Have an up or down vote on this. We've been hearing day after day that the process is open, and why not give the body an opportunity? You know, I think the issue, and if I could just leave at this point, when the Budget Control Act was set up, as you know, we had $1 trillion in cuts. So the notion that Democrats are opposed to cutting the budget is just nonsense. We did $1 trillion. That was 100% cuts. That was no revenue. Now we're coming to the second $1.2 trillion. And it's our view that the cuts in the Republican reconciliation program are very harmful. You cut significantly into food and nutrition programs. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has said that more than 2 million Americans will lose access to food and nutrition support through SNAP, that over 300 kids will be denied access to the school lunch program, that 300,000 kids who get their health insurance through the Children's Health Insurance Program will no longer get it. We don't think that's the right way to go. And so we have a substitute proposal. And, Mr. Chairman, what happened last time, and the reason the defense cuts are part of the sequester, is because way back last August, our Republican colleagues refused to have revenue from closing tax loopholes as part of a deficit reduction package. So that was a deliberate decision that was made on a bipartisan basis. Everybody who voted for the Budget Control Act knew that going in. The same question is being confronted today. In our substitute amendment, Republicans have a clear choice. Do you prefer to protect the special interest tax loopholes, or do you prefer to protect defense spending? And it can't have it both ways. You can't say that these sequester cuts to defense are so harmful to the national security that you're not willing to end big oil subsidies or close some tax loopholes to help pay for that defense, to pay for the common defense. And I really think you should give this body an opportunity to vote up or down on that substitute amendment.
I could give just as equally a fervored, impassioned speech about how the Democrats on the Super Committee didn't want to cut spending. They wanted more tax increases. We had a difference of opinion as to how to get the extra $1.2 trillion in deficit savings, deficit reduction. We wanted to cut spending because we think we have a spending-driven debt crisis. Spending doubles as a percentage of our economy over the next couple of decades, then doubles again. And revenues are expected to go back, even if we keep the current tax cuts where they are, they're expected to go back up to above their 40-year historic average. So we can go back and forth on all of this. We made a decision that if you're going to spend more money, rather than going back and forth to the taxpayer over and over again, cut spending to pay for it. Now, what we've also said is we want to go after these loopholes too, but we want to go after these loopholes in the spirit of tax reform, which historically has been bipartisan. And we want to go after loopholes in the spirit of tax reform to get job creation, to lower tax rates on American businesses so they can be competitive, so those rates can be as low as possible so we can have as much prosperity as possible. So we're not saying we're not against closing loopholes. We're against raising taxes to pay for more spending. We want to lower tax rates, treat everybody fairly by closing these loopholes, but the result, under our view, in our opinion, is more job creation, more competitive businesses. Stop taxing our businesses a lot more than our foreign competitors are taxing theirs, And given that we're in a spending-driven debt crisis, given that we have a $1.2 trillion deficit this year, we should cut spending. And that's what we're proposing to do, and that's why our rules reflect that.
And I guess the difference here and what's so unfair is that you will have an opportunity to bring your proposal to the floor tomorrow, and we will not. And I'm just going to say one last thing, because I have a lot of respect for you, and we just have very different opinions about the direction this country wants to go in. But, I've talked about this issue of the cuts in food and nutrition programs over and over and over again. I sat in on the Agriculture Committee, subcommittee hearing on SNAP yesterday. The majority is in control, and they brought their witnesses, and none of them embraced what, in fact, your proposal would suggest. In fact, they cautioned against the cutbacks in the food and nutrition programs. And, I got to tell you, I don't know how all this process works, but, Agriculture Committee a couple of weeks ago makes this $36 billion in cuts in SNAP benefits. Then they hold a hearing in which their own witness basically says, that's probably not a good idea. It just seems to me that, and I say this very, I say this very sincerely. I hope, as this process moves on, that my friends on the Republican side will take a real hard and objective look at what some of these cutbacks are going to mean. And, and this notion that this is about creating a culture of dependency when the majority of people on food stamps work for a living, as if that's the kind of job everybody wants, where you earn so little that you have to be dependent on public assistance. It's going to be hurtful, because we have a crisis right now. And just one final thing.
Yeah.
I've been hearing, every once in a while I'll turn on Fox News and I hear the kind of the rant on the other side, which is, boy, the amount we have spent on SNAP has gone up. Boy, there must be something wrong. The reason why the amount has gone up is because the economy went into a deep depression, and we're now getting our way out of it. When the economy gets stronger, the amount we spend on SNAP will decrease. So the answer is jobs, and not taking a meat-ex to the program, which I think will really hurt people. And I'm sure you read the letter from the Catholic bishops. They agree with me on this too.
It's been brought to my attention
yesterday, and I'm grateful for their wisdom on this issue.
So a couple of points, I guess I would say. Even under the Democratic, last session, the Democratic majority's pay-go rule, his substitute would not be in order. So it wouldn't even fit the old pay-go standard. Our amendments did fit the pay-go standard because it worsens the deficit relative to the base bill. So even if you were in charge, this substitute would be ruled out of order anyway. It would have violated.
If we were in charge, we could.
So you could have waived it, I guess. Well, I'm just trying to say it doesn't even live up to your own rules that you had in place.
You're going to waive all the rules on when it comes to your bill too. So
But let me address what I think. You're probably the most sincere advocate for the food and nutrition programs in Congress. You really are. You have a name for yourself in advocating for SNAP and for food stamps, and you are the expert on this program. I appreciate your expertise on this. We had a hearing on this program before the markups, and one of our experts, an economist who studied this program, said that the program would have grown by 40%, adjusting for the recession, if no other changes had been made. Other changes were made in the last farm bill, in the last stimulus bill, which I think altogether resulted in a 270% increase in this program over the last 10 years.
The average food stamp benefit was $3 a person.
So, but there are certain issues that we think
we upped it for inflation.
Right. So, well, that's the catch-up,
right,
which the Democratic majority last year used, canceling the catch-up as a pay-for other government spending areas. Now that we're using the rescission of the catch-up for deficit reduction, it's not good now. The Democratic majority last year proposed getting rid of the catch-up provisions. So we're simply doing the same thing here. The other thing we think is important to revisit is categorical eligibility. We're basically saying people who are technically eligible for food stamps should get them.
Right.
But that's not what's happening today. People who are not technically eligible for food stamps are getting them. And so that's what we're trying to deal
I disagree.
by getting rid of categorical eligibility. That's what our witnesses
Well, we had
testify
this
to.
conversation yesterday, too. I mean, the deal is categorical eligibility only, if you're eligible for one low-income
Yeah.
program, makes you eligible to be
But
considered.
there are other eligibility
for SNAP.
standards that are
Right,
different
but
than the
you-
food stamp program,
but
which allows
you don't
people
get
to be.
SNAP benefits if you don't meet an income criteria.
That's actually has not been the case.
Well, we can talk long about that.
But in the macro sense, instead of, we're taking 4% off of that 270% increase. I hardly think that is a devastating effect.
You'll be surprised
So-
with every dollar.
Well,
coming into the company.
our experts that.
But the gentleman
Yeah.
here, just a moment. In light of the fact, Mr. Ryan, that you brought up what would happen if the Democrats had been in control, I'm curious if you know, or if the chairman of the Rules Committee can tell me how many times we have waived Cutco.
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you know, Mr. Chairman? So while you're waiting, let me give you some examples. We waived Cutco for patent reform. We waived Cutco for the Budget Control Act of 2011. We waived it for the Budget Control Act again on S-365. We waived it on Panama Trade. We waived it on payroll tax, transportation, payroll tax, conference report, and student loans. And what I'm getting at is we tend to do it when we want to, but now we're at a very crucial state, and we're saying we don't want to when in fact we can. So what's your response to that, Mr. Chairman?
Well, Mr. McGovern, will you yield to me?
I yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me just respond by saying we have never waived pay-go on a standalone amendment. Excuse me, we've never waived, well, it's interesting. I wondered how many times we waived pay-go to deal with a standalone amendment, and the answer to that is it was not waived. And I think the important point to make here is that if one juxtaposes cut-go to pay-go, the issue of spending and taxes are looked at very differently. In the issue of cut-go, we are focusing on reducing the size and scope and reach of government. In the issue of pay-go, the focus that when Democrats were in the majority had was on increasing taxes. And so, Mr. McGovern, you're absolutely right in stating that cut-go is focused on spending cuts and not tax increases, just as pay-go was focused on tax increases and not spending cuts.
Would the gentleman
I thank my
continue to
friend for
yield?
yielding.
If the gentleman will continue to yield, you see, that's a scholarly statement with reference to the matter. Reduced to its simplest form is we have the power in this committee to waive cut-go and pay-go. And if we choose not to, it's because we choose not to. What Jim and I are trying to say to you, Mr. Chairman, and to Chairman Ryan, is that there's a body out there of a significant number of other people who might have some ideas or wish to make an expression, or at the very least have a vote. And we know what's going on. We're in pure unadulterated politics mode, and that's fine. I can accept that. But at least give us a shot. And that's what Mr. Van Hollen's substitute would do. And it is totally unfair to not permit it. It's not your fault, Paul. It's this committee's fault. And we can do it if we want to. We have done it in the past, both with Democrats and Republicans. We do have the power to do pretty much anything we want to with reference to the rules. But what we did do was we waived Clause 10 of Rule 21 8 times. Mm-hmm. And all I'm saying is we could do it again. I thank the gentleman for yield.
Yeah, I'm prepared to yield. Thank you very much. I can yield back.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could change focus for a slight second here on an issue that is perhaps more important to me than what we have talked about so far. If I could ask about the section that deals with retirement issues, especially retirement issues, the first concept. As I understand within this proposed budget or this reconciliation, is the change in retirement affecting all federal employees or just those who have not vested and new hires?
Yes. I didn't get your question. Sorry. I was interrupted.
Does the change apply to all federal employees?
Yes.
Or only? Okay. So it does not apply to those who have not yet vested or new hires?
Correct.
To everybody. Do you have a dollar figure of what that kind of potential savings would be?
What's the OGR savings number?
Could I ask you, if you think it's roughly in the $80 billion range somewhere?
Yeah, that's about right. That's right.
Okay.
I was going to give you the exact number, but that's about right.
Let me also ask you this about the FIRST program that we have. Often in state retirement programs, the state rate that is paid is an actuarial projection of what needs to be done. And sometimes, especially after the recent drop in the economy, states had to readjust those rates to preserve the system and preserve the financial integrity of the system. So the question I would have is our federal FIRST program in danger of having an unfunded liability that would require this change?
No. CSRS program has an unfunded liability. Yeah, CSRS does, but FIRST does not.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
CSRS does, but FIRST does not.
Okay. And is the change in both of those then the same approach?
I believe it's a similar approach.
Okay. All right. And the FIRST is the more recent one, right?
That's correct.
That most employees are currently on.
Right.
All right.
People were grandfathered into CSRS when the FIRST program came into place. Yeah.
Most of the money then that would be saved by the change in the formula, is that going to go to deficit reduction?
Yes, that's the change that we've asked Rules Committee to make, which is to make sure that this does go to accrue to deficit reduction and it doesn't free up money for agencies to spend.
Thank you. That answers the specific questions I have for now.
Yeah.
I yield back.
Yes. Mr. Ryan, when I got home last night after the vote-a-thon that we had, I surprisingly took myself, turned television on. Among the first things that I saw was a television report where you were at, I guess for lack of a better expression, at a town meeting, or town hall meeting. And,
Yeah, I did 6 town hall meetings last
okay, and a person put to you a question regarding student loans. I did not really, it caught my attention, and I looked, and I heard words to the effect of that was, and you correct me, because I really didn't, it was blurred to me, because as a matter of fact, they were running a scroll under the time that you were talking, so I was more interested in hearing you than I was reading. But that said, you were reported as saying something to the effect of the student loans were not as high a priority as other matters.
No, I didn't say that at all. No, the question, if I think what you're talking about, was, will you support preventing the student loan rate from hiking? And I said, yes, I voted for that last week.
Okay.
Then the questioner said, well, but it wasn't bipartisan. I said the pay-fors we passed, I think it was $6 billion, came from a part of the President's health care law that we had used at pay-fors before that Democrats had previously supported.
I see.
And so we believed when we put that pay-for together to prevent the student loan rate hike that it was bipartisan. Unfortunately, the vote was not. And so the question was, will there be a bipartisan outcome to preventing the student loan rate hike from occurring, which I just don't know the answer to that because I don't know what the Senate's going to do. I don't know what conference is going to do. I don't know where we're going to be on that.
So you didn't say anything about it being or not being the highest priority?
No,
I accept context.
not at all.
Okay, then I don't remember which program I saw it on, but I'll go back.
Should have gone to sleep when you got home.
Yeah. See, what are you doing watching town hall
That's
meetings?
probably true, but I'm glad I saw it because I will.
Not as high a priority. I don't know where that would have come. That's definitely
Typical of the media. I'm sure they took it out of context, so I don't have any problem with that. And because what I'm hearing you say, they only.
Yeah, it was a technical question about. Are you going to prevent this rate hike from happening?
I got you. And I'll put it in the framework here. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to include the statement of administration policy.
Is there objection? Hearing none, it will appear in the record.
All right. The only sentence that I lift from it is that the bill relies entirely on spending cuts that impose a particular burden on the middle class and the most vulnerable among us while doing nothing to raise revenue from the most affluent. Mr. Ryan, there's a section in the bill that cuts Medicare funds that are provided for in the territories. Am I correct?
No, that's Medicaid,
Medicaid?
and not Medicare, yeah. That's
Does
yeah.
it cut it all?
Yeah, that was the plus up in the Health Affordable Care Act for the Medicaid for territories from 50 to 55% the match. It goes back to 50%.
So then we're cutting out,
Yes, so in the
Medicaid
Affordable Care
for the
Act,
territory.
the Medicaid match for the territories went from 50 to 55%. This brings us back down to 50%.
All right.
That was what the Commerce Committee put out in fulfillment of the reconciliation instructions.
all right, well, let me just ask a very comprehensive question, and it will be in the interest of time, and that is, in the long run, what do you and certain members of the majority think will be the economic impact of this kind of severe austerity for working families, the poor,
Yeah.
students, children, disabled, and veterans?
I really appreciate that question, because I believe if we allow this deficit to go on as is, if we don't get our spending under control, then we're going to have a European-style debt crisis. And the people who get hurt the first and the worst are the people who need government the most. People on the safety net, the elderly, the poor. And when you take a look at, my concern is when we measure our poverty-fighting programs and strategies, we seem to only measure it on the inputs, on how much money are we spending, how many programs are we creating. But we're not measuring it on the outcomes. How many people are getting out of poverty? How many people are going from lives of dependency to lives of independence? And if you measure it on outcomes, our track record is miserable. It's not a Republican-Democrat thing. It's just we have strategies that aren't working.
Let me interrupt.
And so what I'm trying to
Just
okay.
1 minute, because you, in response to Mr. McGovern about SNAP, spoke about the fact that people on food stamps that technically not.
That's right. It's called categorical eligibility.
What will reducing the program do to stop those people that are committing fraud? How is it that do you?
Oh, so how does that work? Sure.
A correlation
Right.
between those who are technically
Right. So, for
not
instance,
receiving it.
there's a loophole in the LIHEAP statutes that 16 states and the District of Columbia are utilizing, which if they give a $1 heating assistance check or a $5 heating assistance check, they can trigger an extra $130 of food stamps per month, even whether a person's eligible for the food stamp increase or not. There are non-cash TANF benefits under the categorical eligibility rules that allow, say, a brochure to be given to somebody, not cash TANF, but a brochure or access to an 800 number, which triggers the eligibility of food stamps, even if a person is not technically eligible for food stamps. So what we've seen from our audits, from the GAO, from testimony of expert witnesses at our committees, is that this program has grown so much that people who are in excess of the standards that we wrote in the law are receiving food stamps. We did an audit in Wisconsin. We've got prisoners receiving food stamps in the state of Wisconsin.
Do you not see the food stamp program as just a pass-through, and it creates additional monies?
Right. So the Keynesian argument is if we borrow more money and spend it through government, that will create more demand and that will actually grow the economy. We think the evidence is really clear that's not working. That was the whole economic argument behind the stimulus package, which was promised to bring unemployment, from getting above 8%. It actually went up to 10%. It's still above 8%.
Let me just say, nobody takes food stamps and takes them to Wells Fargo Bank and put them in or in the Bank of America or in a savings account. What they do is they spend the food stamps.
Right, what I'm saying is,
Archer Midland Daniels is sitting there waiting all the way to the tax loophole.
well, let's get rid of their ethanol subsidies. I'm all for that too, by the way.
All of the ag business. Yeah, let me yield.
I want just for unanimous consent to request, Mr. Chairman. I want to submit for the record a letter that was dated May 8th on behalf of the Catholic bishops, which I agree with wholeheartedly, which talks about the devastating impact that these cuts would have.
Without objection, the letter will appear.
Following on that line, do you agree that according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, that 400,000 additional children would be uninsured, or people, and at least 300,000 of them would be children.
So, I think you're talking about CHIP. Is that what he's talking
CHIP?
about? It's what? The maintenance of effort on Medicaid. Yeah, that's the savings on Medicaid. So that's on the Commerce Committee. So our strategy with this policy is we believe by removing the maintenance of effort on Medicaid, we're freeing up the states to better customize the Medicaid program to meet the needs of their states. For instance, I fought for years to get waivers for Wisconsin for the Medicaid program so we could customize it into a program we now call Badger Care. We thought that these strings from Washington on the Medicaid program were making it harder for us to customize the program so that it was more accessible, so that it worked better to meet the needs of Wisconsinites and those who are eligible for Medicaid. What we want to do is extend the same kinds of freedoms and flexibility to the states with this policy, which we think will save money because it cuts strings from Washington, and it will make it easier for states to actually customize their Medicaid programs to meet the needs of their populations.
Okay, and in doing that,
we've learned.
Do you restrict the states to use that money only for Medicaid?
I have to defer to the Commerce Committee, but I believe the answer is yes to that. I believe you can't take it and spend it on roads. You know, it goes to the Medicaid population. That's a very good point.
Yeah, we put it in the general budget. But why did you instruct CBO to use July 1st as the date of
Because
scoring?
implementation of this, we in consultation with CBO, we believe we won't be able to get the savings because you have to send this out to the states. The states have to take some time to implement, and we don't think the savings will start accruing until that time because they need time to build this out.
Well, let me
So
ask
it was just to give them time,
you,
basically.
how often has this reconciliation process been completed in that time, or what is your reaction to what Mr. Ryan just got through saying regarding this July 1st date?
Well, what the July 1st date means is that these families that are relying on these food and nutrition programs will be cut off that much earlier. I mean, in other words, they accelerated the effective date to try and get additional savings. These additional savings are generated because fewer people will have access to the programs. I think it's important to talk about outcomes, and the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office analyzed the outcomes. They were never challenged by any of our Republican colleagues in the committee with respect to the impact these cuts would have. So, for example, on the Children's Health Program, when you eliminate the maintenance of effort, the Congressional Budget Office projects that within 3 years, 300,000 fewer kids will have access to health care through the CHIPS program. When it came to the food nutrition programs, SNAP programs, 2 million Americans will lose their access to food and nutrition through the SNAP program. And again, these are nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office analyses, not of inputs, of outputs, of impact on real human beings. And in our substitute amendment, we said we don't think we want to go in that direction. After all, under the Budget Control Act, if the sequester were to take place as scheduled on January 2nd, 2013, not one penny from the food and nutrition programs would be hit.
Yeah.
Because on a bipartisan basis, we agreed that we weren't going to have the cuts apply to people who were most vulnerable. And so one of the really sort of twisted parts about this is that in order to prevent the sequester on certain areas, we're actually going to cut programs for kids, food and nutrition programs, that would have been protected even with the sequester.
I got you. The final question that I have is more in the line of politics, and that is, as a reconciliation bill, what protections will this bill have when it reaches the Senate?
Well, the Senate would have to choose to do a budget in order to do reconciliation. We believe it's in our interest.
Well, none is that.
Probably. I think, well, you can judge that yourself. We believe it's in our interest to do reconciliation. In our judgment, you're probably going to disagree with this, the last time reconciliation was used for its intended purpose was 2005. I think you'll argue that the Health Care Act, we don't think that was used for its intended purpose. We disagree with having used the Health Care Act, reconciliation, to pass what we then called the sidecar legislation for the Health Care Act. But we should be doing reconciliation every single year. Governments, more than half of our government is on autopilot. It's not being reviewed. We're not going into 61% of our federal government and we should be reviewing that spending. The Appropriations Committee reviews discretionary spending. We vote on it every single year. That's 39% of government.
Right.
The other 61%, we're getting to it every 5 or 6 years. And we just don't think that's right. And so we think this is a good process for us to go through, the Act of Reconciliation. What we're trying to do here is do what the super committee was supposed to do, which is specify the kinds of savings that would replace the sequester. The sequester, no one intended, the president doesn't want the sequester to go into effect. So no one wants the sequester to go into effect. So what we're saying is, let's find savings that we think makes government more efficient, that deals with issues of fraud and waste, and there are programs that we don't like, that we don't think should be funded. The slush fund from the Affordable Care Act, we don't think is a good use of taxpayer money. The FDIC fund in Dodd-Frank, we don't think is a good use of taxpayer dollars.
From me with that business about programs when this sequester comes, and then we cut the programs having to do with things like Medicaid and CHIP and SNAP.
Yes, but we think these are better reforms. We think these Medicaid and CHIP...
all of that waste and fraud and abuse that's going on over there at the Pentagon, Paul, cut me some slack.
There were $22 billion in improper payments in the Medicaid program alone last year, according to the Office of Management and Budget.
Defense, and you're not going to protect them.
We propose to take $300 billion out of defense.
At defense.
We agree with Leon Panetta. We agree with Barack Obama that doing this to defense on January 2nd would decimate our forces. We want to get savings out of defense.
We all exaggerate it all the time, but I know over there are generals serving generals that have captains serving lieutenants and back and forth. And I've sat on airplanes twice now with people that were running up bills and contracting. And there's as much fraud there as there is in Medicaid or Medicare on any given day. And in anticipation of the next speaker, I want to make sure that we understand, in anticipation of what kind of rules that we are going to have, that by not allowing the substitute, then you're not allowing the words of a famous colleague of mine that we enjoy debating, even though we don't agree on much of anything that we talk about. But he said yesterday that the rule that we brought to the floor today is going to open up that debate so that absolutely every member can have their passions and feelings heard on this issue. One more point of pride, Mr. Speaker. He said, I really do like coming down here on Open Rules Day. And I gather, Rob, you and I won't be handling this rule, because if we were, I guess we would be celebrating Closed Rule Day. All right? Thank you. I yield back.
I appreciate the chairman. I appreciate the chairman putting me on the budget committee. Appreciate both chairmans allowing me to serve on the budget committee. It really is one of my great honors. You guys are both surrounded by the teams that help make all of this possible. And I would say exactly what you said, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Hastings, which is this is what we ought to be doing all the time. And I have no doubt, Mr. Van Hollen, that if the tables were reversed and you were chairman instead of the ranking member, you'd be pushing forward on a reconciliation bill as well. I told folks when they were concerned about the Joint Select Committee, I was one of the only Georgians to support the Budget Control Act. I said, this is going to be a serious group of people. I said, you may not like everything Mr. Van Hollen believes, but he does believe the country's in serious economic peril, and he is serious about taking approaches towards deficit reduction. And if we have a chance of making something happen over there, these are not political folks that are on this committee. These are serious policy folks who are on this committee. And I wish we weren't here today. I wish we were here today doing a different reconciliation to take even greater charge of the economics in this land. I wish that the Joint Select Committee had succeeded and we'd had the up or down vote with no amendments and no substitutes, but just one opportunity for the House to work its will. And I tell you, I didn't think I would see an opportunity that the Senate would trade away all the rights of the majority and the minority to allow an up or down vote. In fact, to guarantee an up or down vote. And I thought that was really, one of those once in a generation opportunities. And I can't tell you how disillusioned I am that slipped by. And I continue to hear folks describe the various blame that came thereafter. But I believe folks were serious while they were there, and in the absence of that, here we are today. We did make a choice on day one. I'd say to my friend from from Florida, we made choices about how we're going to run this institution. And one of those choices was we have the question of whether taxes are too low or whether spending is too high. And as we see up on the chart, every time the three of us get together in the Budget Committee, we see the big red wedge there on the wall of whether it's a taxation problem or a spending problem. Last Congress, folks said it's that taxes might be too low, and so we need to pay for things with tax increases. This Congress, we said taxes are too high, and I will say to any of my colleagues who are concerned about the way the rule may shape up, I have absolutely no qualms at all about sticking with the decision this body made on day one that when bills are coming to the floor, we prefer that they address our spending problem and not raise taxes. If we could raise tax on everybody, we still couldn't get ourselves out of this challenge. There's nobody here today. Be happy to yield.
Thank my friend for yielding. Let me just say in response to Mr. Hastings' statement, reading the words of Mr. Woodall, that it's important to note that this bill that's being considered on the House floor did not provide a single waiver for any amendment that's being considered. They're in full compliance with the rules of the House, and that's exactly what we intend to do on this measure as well. And I thank my friend for yielding.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on following that procedure. We're in the middle of this wonderful open process on the 1/3 of the budget that we control, and I celebrate that process. On every spending cut amendment you bring to the floor, Mr. Hastings, I'll tell you, you're going to have my vote, and I look forward to seeing some more of those down there. Mr. Van Hollen, you were talking about the Republican you'd heard earlier saying there was no other option except the option that the Budget Committee reported. And I appreciate your substitute, the progressive substitute. But is it true that the reconciliation bill that we reported out of the Budget Committee, is that the only proposal that anybody's made that is compliant with the rules of the House, that's compliant with our cut-go procedures? Or are there other alternatives out there that I'm not aware of?
Well, Mr. Woodall, first of all, let me say I appreciate your earlier comments, and I agree that the supercommittee, so-called supercommittee, was a missed opportunity at the end of the day, and I'm not going to rehash here all the reasons the committee failed, but I do think part of the reason we're here now and even disagreeing over the form of the sequester substitute relates to the same issues. I mean, going back to a balanced approach. As I said in response to the question from the chairman of the committee earlier, you guys have rigged the rules so you cannot achieve any deficit reduction through raising one penny by closing a tax loophole. You've rigged the rules so that you can't do that. And
if I could interrupt you just a moment, I just want to make sure that you're right. I thought I'd heard the chairman say earlier that the reason that we couldn't consider your substitute had nothing to do with the rules that Republicans put in place this cycle. But if we were operating under the rules that Democrats had in place last cycle, we still couldn't consider your substitute. So if I understood the chairman correctly, I would just hate to describe that as rigging the rules, unless we would say that our Democratic colleagues rigged the rules last time against you, and now we're rigging the rules this time.
The issue, as I understand it, has to do with the amount of deficit reduction that proposals get. So the Republican proposal here does get more deficit reduction. Both proposals, however, achieve enough deficit reduction to eliminate the scheduled sequester. And as you know, Mr. Woodall, that is the goal that's been presented of this exercise, is to prevent the Meade Act's approach to the sequester from taking effect. And the Congressional Budget Office has looked at the Democratic proposal, which is a very detailed proposal. It's ready to go. It's legislative language. And they have said that, in fact, that does replace the sequester. So, again, I would just ask the committee, in the interests of fairness and openness and a vote, to have an up or down vote on it. Let us have our day. Let us have the debate on that issue. I don't see how that debate and transparent discussion would hurt the American people, and think it would help. That would be a healthy debate. It's exactly the kind of debate that every member of this committee on a bipartisan basis has said we should be having over real issues.
Well, and in fairness, I believe we're going to continue to have that debate, that there really is a divide about whether or not we're going to tax our way out of this crisis. or whether it is that we're going to be able to tighten our way out of this crisis.
If I could just respond, Mr.
Please.
Wall, in fairness, because I don't think anybody on the Democratic side has said that we can tax our way out of this crisis. There's no way. We all know what the challenge is. The issue is whether or not we want to take the kind of balanced approach that bipartisan groups have taken, where they combine spending cuts, and again, we cut $1 trillion. That was a bipartisan basis. Our proposal that we put before the committee cuts some more. We eliminate the direct payments and ag subsidies. Your proposal that we're taking to the floor doesn't do that, even though it is in their budget. It is in your budget. But instead of taking that approach, the sequester approach to remove the sequester that's there, eliminated, cut very deeply into the food and nutrition programs. My point is that we agree. There's no way you're going to tax your way out of this issue. But we also believe that if you're going to have a credible deficit reduction plan, it needs both components. I'll just close by saying the last time that we had a balanced budget in this country was in 2001, just before the 2001-2003 tax cuts. And so back then, compared to today, we did have a balanced approach, and that's the last time we also had a balanced budget.
Do you recall what percentage of GDP we were collecting in taxes during that
Yes,
balanced
we were at about 19, a little over 19%, 19-20%. Yes.
I happened to serve up here as a staffer during that time. I tell you, I can't in good conscience claim balanced budget status for those days. I can claim cash flow surplus status for those days. But as I look at the numbers that we see in the Budget Committee regularly, I wonder if we'd actually been candid with America in those days, that these were tax receipts that were coming in for benefits that we were absolutely going to have to pay out a decade from now if we would have dealt with some of those things differently. But in the spirit of bipartisanship and putting everything on the table, are we going to have a revenue discussion? I think we are. In fact, I think we did in the committee. We did in the budget the House passed. We said we need to take revenues from 14% last year to 15% of GDP this year, on up to 18% of GDP, that we absolutely have to have a revenue component, and that everything has to be on the table. The recommendations that you make, I think, should be on the table, not to the exclusion of what is in this reconciliation bill, but in addition to what's in this reconciliation bill. And so I'm particularly troubled by the comments of my friend from Florida, because I agree with him. I think when you throw the kind of money at the Defense Department that we've been throwing at the Defense Department over the last decade, you have tremendous opportunities for savings. In the same way that we have to go after some programs that eligibility standards have been made lax, and thus folks who need the help the most are not the folks who are benefiting from all those dollars. We've got to go after the Defense Department too. Mr. Chairman, is this reconciliation bill going to hold the Defense Department harmless for participating in any sort of budget cuts and constraints?
No, it just turns the sequester off for 1 year, starting January 2nd. Now, the President's budget proposes a $487 billion cut to defense off their baseline. We proposed a $300 billion cut to defense off their baseline. I spoke with the ranking member of the Defense Committee today, HASC, the Armed Services Committee today. They're marking their authorization bill up right now. And we'll see at the end of that process, the authorization bill, then the appropriation bill, where that comports within the two different visions. But both visions, House Republican passed plan and the President's budget proposal, both visions lower defense spending compared to what the Pentagon's been requesting.
The House passed budget reduces defense spending by $300
billion over the decade. Yeah.
And so this sequester is going after yet an additional reduction?
$550 billion in addition to that.
And so the value...
$550 billion every year, 55, and that is what, according to testimony we had in the committee, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, say will decimate the Pentagon. Decimate, I think that's the word they use, was decimate.
Decimate.
Yeah, I think that's the word they use.
The President's...
Hollow out. Okay, I'm sorry, decimate. Hollow out. Somebody said decimate. One of our experts said decimate. Hollow out our defense.
If I could go back to Mr. McGovern's concerns about the SNAP program, did I understand you to say that in order to take care, adjust for inflation, take care of the population that most definitely needs this help, we would have seen a 40% increase in the program.
That's what, so we had an economist from the University of Chicago who's done a study on this, who came and testified at the Budget Committee, that said the increase in SNAP program is far, far in excess of what it would have just been, had it just been adjusted for the recession. The testimony said it would have grown 40%. Over the decade, it's grown 270%. So that additional growth is a result of expanding the program beyond those who are technically eligible to receive the benefit.
Will the gentleman yield just for...
Be happy to yield.
Just to kind of put all this in perspective, before the last Farm Bill, the average food stamp benefit per person was $3 a day. Hardly an overly generous benefit. We made some adjustments that increased what that average benefit would be. We, unfortunately, much to my distress, we dipped into the SNAP program to pay for an emergency bill for teachers. And
Yeah, so that's the catch-up we were talking about.
And for the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Bill, with the promise that they would try to reinstitute, those cutbacks. As of right now, the average food stamp recipient's benefit, right now, if we did nothing, will decrease in 2013 because of the cutbacks that have been made. So, and I just fundamentally disagree that all these people out there are getting food stamps who aren't entitled to it. That's another discussion. But, as we talk about this adjustment, let's understand this is not, nobody, working people are eligible for some food stamp benefits because they're not making enough money. These are poor people, and we ought to recognize that.
Well,
and as a community, we ought to be willing to help them.
As a community, we should absolutely be willing to help them.
Yeah.
We have this program at the federal level, thinking about putting it in perspective, 270% increase under current law. If it would take the House
reduce that by 4% under this proposal.
Down to 260%?
Yes, that's right.
So going back to the frustrations of the Joint Select Committee, I mean, I don't know where we end up. Even packing a committee with serious people, if we're going to call a reduction in benefits from a 270% increase to a 260% increase, a draconian cut that is not respectful to folks. I'm just saying, 270 to 260, and that's you make my point exactly, Mr. McGovern. If we can't even have a conversation here among colleagues in the Rules Committee about how it is that we keep from passing a bankrupt future along to our children and our grandchildren, if we can't even agree that 260% increases in benefit packages might be a fair step in the right direction, we have serious challenges addressing the much bigger numbers that are going to be out there. You will not find me telling you that my folks back home are unwilling to chip in another penny in tax revenue. They are. They say, show me a path towards prosperity, thank you. They say, show me how we can get from here to there, and I want to be a part of that solution. If I'm a receiver of benefits, I want to be a part of that solution with my benefits. If I'm a payer of taxes, I want to be a part of that solution as a payer of taxes. And we have not gone through this process going after the two-thirds of the budget that we all know is the challenge since we manipulated this process to increase spending instead of decrease spending under the President's health care bill. I remember the gyrations this Congress went through. Was it $43 billion, Austin? What was reconciliation in 2005? 43 billion? 40 billion.
ERA, it was 40 over 5.
40 over 5. This Congress was wrapped up in knots for weeks. These are serious challenges, and I, like I say, I couldn't be prouder to serve on a committee that takes these challenges that seriously. I don't. If this problem is to be solved, it's to be solved with leadership like these two men that are sitting at this table. I'm glad to have the single most junior seat on your committee. I welcome Ms. Bonamici now. That's right. I welcome her participation now that she is there. And irrespective of what happens on the House floor, this country is in better hands because you two gentlemen are at the budget helm, and I hope folks back home know that and appreciate that. I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, sir. Mr. Scott, Mr. Webster.
and look forward to consideration of the measure. That will conclude the hearing portion for consideration of H.R. 5652. And Chair will be in receipt of a motion. The gentleman from Dallas.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 5652, the Sequester Replacement Reconciliation Act of 2012, a closed rule. The rule provides 2 hours of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Budget. Rule waives all points for or against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment, nature of a substitute consistent of the text of the Rules Committee print 112-21 shall be considered and adopted as the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points for or against provisions in the bill as amended. Finally, the rule provides one motion recommit with or without instruction.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Let me explain the rule briefly here. All of the amendments that had been submitted, as I said earlier during the hearing portion, were in violation of cut-go. This is an emergency meeting, as we all know, and the rule will contain what is simply a technical waiver of the 3-day layover requirement. And the reason I describe it as simply a technical waiver is that, as we all know, a week ago Monday, the provisions were made available online, and committee print that will be, this is the committee print here, that'll be on the floor, has been online since Monday, late afternoon, and there are very, very minor technical changes that have been made to what has been available for, I guess, about 10 days now online. So because of the fact that we did, as we discussed earlier, ensure that Mr. Van Hollen was able to, even though he'd had 7 days, if he had filed the minority views from the committee a couple of days ago, we would not have had to waive the 3-day layover requirement. But he was certainly within his rights to do so, as I said, even though he had the number of days to deal with it, basically a week. We are here under the structure that we have now. So are there any amendments to the rule, Mr. McGovern?
Mr. Chairman, I want to say something before I offer my first amendment, if I can. To explain why we're a little frustrated with this process and why we're disappointed. Yesterday, you gave yourself martial law. Today, you're using emergency procedures. You just filed this bill at 6 p.m. It's a couple of hours ago. You announced the meeting an hour ago. You were waiving the 3-day rule. This is a 714-page committee report, and was just filed, as I said, a couple of hours ago. I don't think members will go through all this, even if they went to a speed reading class by tomorrow morning. The bill we are voting on isn't even the bill the Budget Committee approved. Instead, you are putting in an amendment from the Rules Committee, an amendment that doesn't even have a sponsor and has not been through the committee process. And once again, the Republicans write the bill, and the Republicans are the only ones allowed to offer an amendment. And rather than giving it a separate vote, you are self-executing passage of your amendment. So Mr. Van Hollen came before this committee as a thoughtful approach. I understand you disagree with it. I think it really kind of illustrates the difference between our two parties and how we approach things. But let me be clear what we're asking for. We're asking that you give us what you have given yourselves. You don't even have to self-execute our amendment. We just want a fair up or down vote. And I think considering this process, considering the importance of this issue, considering the fact that it has been expressed that we want to have a rational and positive dialogue on this stuff, I hope that amendment will be made in order. I would like to offer an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Van Hollen of Maryland, number 2. This is the Democratic alternative to replace the sequester, and instead of protecting tax breaks for the wealthy, like the Republican plan does, it makes smart, targeted spending cuts and introduces more fairness to the tax code with the Buffett rule and a repeal of tax breaks for big oil companies.
You've heard the motion, gentlemen. The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Those have it. Those have it.
As for recorded vote.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Mr. Sessions votes no. Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall votes no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent votes no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott votes no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster votes no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern votes aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings votes aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis votes aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Chairman votes no.
And Mr. Clerk,
3 yea, 7 nay.
and the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, before offering an amendment, I'd like to echo the sentiments of...
8 nays.
Sorry. So
I'm sorry.
Hold it just
Yes,
one
sir.
second. When it-
3 yeas, 8 nays.
3 yeas and 8 nays.
All right.
For the record. Thank you. Gentleman is recognized.
I echo the sentiments of my colleague, Mr. McGovern, totally. And I, for the life of me, am trying to understand how what you say, Mr. Chairman, the print of this bill was on your website or on the Rules Committee website on the day that you said. But now you come to waive all points of order against the provision in the bill as amended for this. Hold that thing up there, Jim.
No.
I'll
I'll hold it up.
Yeah, well, both of you hold it up, because it's a whole lot that people haven't read when all is said and done. And so what you're waiving is the committee report. And there may be some people that, if they had an opportunity, typical of all legislation, Democrats and Republicans, what winds up happening is we're getting ready to pass something that people won't know about until a month from now when it's in the Washington Times or the Washington Post. And somehow or another, something is wrong with that picture. In addition to the fact, I'd like anybody to join me in welcoming the American people to Closed Rule Day in the United States House of Representatives. We had the first open rule yesterday after 309 days of no open rules. And what we have now is not a single opposing viewpoint is allowed. All new ideas are banned. And where everyone who didn't write the bill is completely shut out. And where my colleague, Mr. Woodall, put it yesterday so adequately, and he will hear it over and over again from me, passions and feelings cannot be heard. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Honda, amendment number 1. This is the Progressive Caucus substitute, and I'm a proud member of that caucus. And there's a colleague of mine down my way that says that these people are communists. Well, I ain't no communist, and he needs to know that, and the Progressive Caucus are not, and nor are any of the other 434 plus those people in the territories communists.
Vote occurs on the Hastings Amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair. The noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is agreed to. There further. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Sessions votes no. Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall votes no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent votes no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott votes no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster votes no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern votes aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings votes aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis votes aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Chairman votes no.
Clerk, report the total.
3 yea and 8 nay.
And the amendment is not agreed to. There further amendments?
Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Bishop.
I would, as a powerful Republican, who unfortunately had the chance of reading this thing, I move that the committee make an order an amendment that I have prepared with the appropriate waivers and ask the staff if they would distribute the text to the members to put in their treasures of truth. If I could speak to this amendment, I'd
Gentleman is
appreciate it.
recognized.
One of the opportunities I had in the state legislature was I served for 4 terms as the chairman of the State Retirement Committee, which I truly enjoyed because retirement issues are boring as hell, and no one actually
would
looked
actually
at
enjoy it.
Yeah, and no one actually looked at the product I presented as far as bills, and I could just say it's good, vote for it, and it happened. But one of the things that is different in many of the states, and Utah including as one of them, is that the retirement contributions actually belong to the employee, and the state can change its rate if the viability of the program is in danger. But what is given to the employee becomes a contractual obligation. So any changes that were made in the retirement system are done only for new hires. Here it is slightly different. Congress does have no legal obligation to the employees, but I do think there is somewhat of a moral obligation to people that we have hired who have been 20, 25 years and then change their retirement benefits retroactively. The committee that recommended this, not ours, but the committee that recommended this, said they had survey data, tried to compare what we're spending with what the private sector does. I realize that is there, although I have to admit that on all those surveys, I have a hard time finding out how and what, how you compare an F-16 fighter pilot with the private sector. So there are some innate disadvantages for doing that. And since, indeed, the money that would go from this change would go into deficit reduction, my amendment simply says the changes we make in the retirement contributions made by federal employees would only apply to those who have yet to vest and those who would be new hires going into the system, so that we maintain our obligation to those who are currently in the system. This, as has been scored, and I understand it, is a $28 billion savings, as opposed to the $80 billion that is in the current bill, and it would go to deficit reduction. I understand. I remember in the last session sitting with former Congressman Abercrombie from Hawaii as we talked about the pay-go rules at that time, and our frustration with finding the limitations on how you can actually move from one section to the other, and recognizing that pay-go was basically an accounting game that we played amongst ourselves. Cut-go, I think, is better, and I think you stated the difference between the two as far as the philosophy behind them, but it still becomes an accounting game that we sometimes play amongst ourselves. I actually make this as a motion because I think it is the right thing to do for the employees that work for the federal government. I don't have a problem with changing the program, but I want it to do for those who are new hires or those who have yet to vest in the system.
Well, let me say that I thank the gentleman and appreciate his bringing this to our attention. I share his concerns, and I believe that it's a very important issue that does, in fact, need to be addressed. Now, I mean, the characterization of cut-go, I think I appreciate your recognizing my explanation of the disparity between cut-go and pay-go. I mean, very clearly has to do with the philosophy of each of the political parties. In light of that, we don't, this amendment, as I'd indicated at the outset, is not in compliance with the cut-go rule that was passed by this House at the beginning. And so I would hope very much, I mean, we want to figure out ways in which this issue can be addressed, but it is important for us to move ahead with this reconciliation measure, and I hope that the gentleman would consider withdrawing the amendment and hope that we could move forward and work on this.
Could we not wait and allow Mr. Bishop's amendment?
Well, I'm going to encourage the committee not to do that, and
I'll go with him.
I understand that. I just am saying that this is an issue that I hope very much that we can see addressed, and I appreciate Mr. Bishop bringing it to our attention. But as I said, it's not in compliance.
Mr. Chairman, I somewhat understood or presupposed what the issue would be, and that whether it is not in compliance here or down on the floor, some parliamentarian would also rule it not germane to the base issue. And one of the ironies of this process, which was a whole lot easier when I was Speaker in Utah. I could do whatever I wanted to. But in the irony of this process, for me to continue on with this issue, which I do want to progress further, I have to be able to address it in a place where it will not be considered non-germane.
Right.
And that means I will withdraw it so I can pursue this issue in another venue, wherever it goes after here or after the floor. I still believe very strongly that what we are doing is legal, but it is unfair and it is wrong, and that there is a better way of approaching this, and we can still have savings. So I will withdraw my amendment.
I thank the gentleman, and I will say that we obviously want to do what we can to work with him, and it's a very important issue, as I said, that does need to be addressed. The vote now occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. By the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions.
Aye.
Sessions votes aye. Ms. Fox.
Yay.
Ms. Fox votes aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall votes aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent votes aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott votes aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster votes aye. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern votes no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings votes no. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis votes no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye.
And Mr. Clerk, the total?
8 yea, 3 nay.
And the motion is agreed to, and this will be managed by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, and for the Democrats, Mr. McGovern. And let me just say that this will be the last meeting for the week, and to announce to members that it's quite possible, as was stated earlier in the hearing portion, the House Armed Services Committee is in the process of marking up the Defense Authorization Bill, and we anticipate a possible meeting next Tuesday on the Department of Defense Authorization Bill. As we all know, there are many amendments submitted to that, and so we should anticipate an interesting and, I suspect, rather lengthy hearing on that. So without objection, the committee stands adjourned.